And we also, Milton Grimes may or may not join us. He's been a little bit ill, and we'll wait and see whether or not he's able to make it. The third guest, of course, we have the famous Dean Robinson of the George Washington Law School, and she is an expert in trial practice, and so which is a wonder to have her again on the show. But before we get started, I'd like to give a big shout out to the young man, Damar Hamlin. Like many of you, I was watching horror as he had what was an innocuous collision that you see all the time, and then he basically had cardiac arrest. And so for most people, there's a distinction between a heart attack and cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest is when, well, a heart attack, you may or may not have severe symptoms. You could have blockage and it could go on for days, or it could be an urgent matter. It's bad to have a heart attack. You could die from a heart attack, but cardiac arrest is where you actually die, in the sense that you shut down and then they have to resuscitate your life by getting your heart beating again. And that's what happened to him. So, in horror, we all witnessed what amount to a person who died on the football field, they bring back alive. So it was just a terrifying event. And we're happy to see that he's recovering. So thank the Lord, because it was a shocking event for everyone. But the second thing is that—
Attorney Lee?
Yes.
With respect to that so near tragic incident on the field Monday night, and just a miraculous recovery of the young man, it also speaks to the importance of those defibrillators being readily available, which of course aided in the resuscitation of the player. And my understanding is that he was required to be resuscitated twice, once on the field, of course, and then later on in the hospital. But that is why those defibrillators are just must-have equipment. And we saw exactly how they came into play and aided in the saving of the life of the young football player.
Yeah, it was just remarkable. But also, it also talks about advanced safety technique in terms of the heart massage or the life-saving CPR method that was used. And everything went right for him, and that's why he's still alive today. The average American don't have that type of urgent care, and we lose people every day because of lack of knowledge about CPR and how you get the heart started back with your hands and things like that. So I would encourage everyone to take a CPR course. It's important. Defibrillators are important, but most people don't have them at home. So for your loved ones, always take the course if you can. Usually it's not very expensive. They do them free usually at your local Red Cross, and all the colleges usually offer that. I did the training when I was back in college, but in any event, our top news story this week dealt with our first branch of government. The United States, by the Constitution, we have three branches of government. We have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary branch under the Constitution. The legislative branch is comprised of two bodies. You have the Congress and you have the Senate. Laws are passed in the legislative branch, and then they have to be signed by the president. This week, historically, we had something that I've not seen in my lifetime. The Republicans won the majority of seats in the House, and it's a simple process usually of electing a member from that party to be the Speaker of the House. Well, Dean Robinson, what happened to this fiasco? You're in DC. What happened? You've been on the news all week over there in DC.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for having me and for being amongst the, you and great minds. What happened in DC was that the speaker should always, the person who seeks to be the Speaker of the House should always have what we say in the National Bar, count your votes so you know you have your votes. And you had, coming out of the election season, not the red wave that the Republicans had predicted, but rather a little bit of a red tomato rolling down the nation. So they did not have the majority of the votes, period, coming into the House. And so when there was the attempt to just simply think that they will get there, and that the now Speaker McCarthy would just have an easy time of getting to the 218, 17, whatever, however you count it, votes, he didn't have it. And then there was that unified, which I think is always marvelous, unified Democratic side of the House. That caucus had all 212 votes for our esteemed McKean Jeffries. And so they hung together. They had already decided in December what they would do. And so you had within the Republican caucus, this still small group of those who are have always been aligned with the mega caucus. They're just a very small group in the minority, very vocal. They seek media. They don't necessarily want to do anything, but they want to have the power, and also made up of election deniers from the 2020 election who still refuse to say that President Biden won the election. And some of these, if you look at it, the holdouts, the majority of them were those who continue to deny, and have some of them are now being investigated based on the January 6th investigation and report. Those who are under investigation because of their role in the insurrection. So this sort of came in with these two blocks, and McCarthy did not have the votes. He did have to give away the store in order to get finally early this morning the votes he needed to become the speaker. So if I could, so that's what really happened, which was you had the Democratic caucus, the Democrats had it already decided on the agenda items, things that Americans needed, and kept in focus that this is for the American people, regardless of their party. But on the other side, there was not that unity of thought about what would be good for Americans. And the agenda for some of them, this vocal minority, was really, let's just investigate the Biden administration, the Biden son's laptop, and if you could believe it, investigate as well Anthony Fauci, who, thank God that he was in the administration and the one before, because we would have had far more COVID deaths without him. So that's what happened. But in order to do the people's business, there are major challenges for what we call this government in transition. Although all of the members were voted in early this morning, and therefore are members of Congress, including someone who calls himself, we'll have to prove that up, Santos. We don't know if that's his real name, but all of them were voted in. But what they can't do is begin the business of government and the business of Congress on the House side until they approve what they call the rules committee, and the rules that govern how they proceed during the 118th Congress.
Well, Attorney Banks, you have additional comments on that issue?
Well, this has just been fascinating to watch, and thank you, Dean Robinson, for your outstanding summary of what we've been witnessing in Congress all week. And it's particularly ironic to me that all of this is taking place on the second anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, and that many of those 20 holdouts,
yes,
actually, as you stated, are being investigated for their role in the January 6th insurrection. And that 2 years ago, they actually voted not to certify the election. But yet, early this morning, we saw two things. Well, we saw a selfie being taken between Speaker McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
correct.
One of the most far right leaning representatives who had actually had her committee assignments taken away because of some of the outlandish racial and other comments that she has made consistently over the last 2 years, and him thanking former President Donald Trump, who the January 6th committee just recommended charges and that he be prosecuted on charges of obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to make a false statement, and incitement of an insurrection and other conspiracy charges. And I also wished, Alfreda, that I was a fly on the wall this morning as I watched the conversation between Representative and the highly distinguished and National Bar Association member Sheila Jackson Lee and Matt Gaetz.
Yes.
And it appeared to be a collegial discussion. And I'm thinking, what are they talking about? And later this morning,
She explained.
Was interviewed by CNN commentator Laura Coates, she stated that Gaetz was sharing with her at that time that the impasse was over and that McCarthy would be elected on the 15th round. But the question becomes, at what cost?
Yeah, if I could just interject one thing, if I could, there's a view that actually there has been no break since January 6, 2020. This is just a continuation. What we've seen since then is a continuation of the efforts to actually destroy the democracy. These are the same people. They're entrenched. Their numbers, I mean, who would have thought that 12 people could ever hold up an election for 4 days, and put on the ballot someone who had only served one term, the brother. And we understand that that's what, sort of that whole, this entire thing is, if you think about it, it's a continuation. They do not want to govern. There is not on that side, and that's why McCarthy giving away the whole store is problematic. We have a looming need to begin certainly and get it done in September to raise the debt ceiling. Some of these folks like Barbara she doesn't even understand that we already have a budget. Raising that debt ceiling does is only allow us to pay for what we've already spent, that we're going to keep our commitment and to keep the government open, to prevent the default on the US debt, and to downgrade and to prevent the downgrade of the US bond rating. And I know that you know about this well, Madam President, past President Vanita Banks. From a tax perspective, No one on Wall Street wants there to be a downgrade of the US bond rating. We can't get the John Lewis Act passed unless in earnest we have folks like what was being done by our, NBA member, Sheila Jackson Lee. We need to get that passed. We have to bring in those who are on the other side on some of these issues, and because that is going to prevent what happened this fall, which was the following. That election, and I guess it's last year. The election results came because of the gerrymandering that was done to eliminate Black votes that were in particular places. We've got to have an America that reflects the diversity of America. So we need the John Lewis bill and other things, and I won't go into those, I'll stop at that, but I think we have to view this as a continuing effort to return to a time where the only people who were running things were those who represented now and know that it's coming there, a minority of Americans, and whose view of what is good for America is one where, for example, there's no women's protection of her own right to choose. So I'll stop there.
There are so many issues, and what we witnessed early this morning and over the last week just reinforces this, extremism.
Yes.
That McCarthy, who's a part of it, poster child for it, has conceded to the most extreme wing of the Republican Party, this MAGA wing, as past NBA President Alfreda Robinson stated as well. And this is after they lost in the midterm elections. The American people voted against this extremism. And so it's really, really dangerous still. Democracy, we're still holding on by a thread, very, very fragile. But it's clear that this extremist ideology is deeply, unfortunately, it's rooted in the Democratic Party, and that they're more interested in engaging in these culture wars as opposed to governing in the best interest of the American people. So it's very, very problematic. McCarthy, at what cost? All of these concessions that he made, with respect to, as Alfreda stated, the debt ceiling, as well as, forcing votes on immigration, spending cuts. It'll be interesting to see these rule changes, Alfreda, that you mentioned, and how he's conceded several committee chairmanships to, again, this very extremist wing of the party.
Well, one thing I need to point out, so our audience understand, January the 6th of 2020, we had a mob group attempted to overthrow the federal government. Yesterday, January 6th of 2023, it was 2021, yesterday represented the 2-year anniversary of this mob attempt to take over the Capitol. The Democrats stood outside and observed this traumatic event on American democracy. Only one Republican actually came to honor the people that saved their lives. It was just a tragic situation. But the point of this is that democracy is very fragile. And so what we saw unfold this week suggests that we're likely to face a significant debt crisis this year, because if this political party, who's now controlled Section 1, the legislative branch in the Congress, if they can't select their own leader, it took, what, 15 votes?
Yes.
In a whole week to do something that normally is a perfunctory process that usually take about an hour. If they can't do that, then I suggest that how do we get past this debt ceiling, counselor? How do we get past that when these folks can't agree on anything?
Well, we have to do it by, and I believe certainly that Jeffries is going to be up to the task. We're going to have to build alliances, act by act, proposal by proposal, to achieve those things that we know we need for the people. And that's what's going to happen. And then for our part, we're going to have to aggressively be in a place where we are using our own efforts, our own votes, to let our representatives know about those things that need to happen. And we need to be as active as anyone else in contacting our members and also protecting the right to vote, which is fundamental. Can I mention something else, if I could, Attorney Lee? The College Reform Act is very important, because right now every state gets that one vote, whatever it is, right? That means that we have California, which has a huge number, New York, a huge number of a huge population. They get no more votes than smaller states like Iowa. So what we need to do is look at those, come together, get good thought groups, convenings, where we really take these issues as you're doing here. And I thank you for doing this and been doing it for a long time, and explain it to our communities, what's at stake, so that they can then, in their own communities, their own community groups, their own sororities and fraternities and everyone else, church groups, explain what is at stake, so that we can get the members of Congress to vote in the way that protects all Americans, not just some Americans.
Okay, we'll take one quick caller. Okay, Mr. Pullen, you got a question or comment for Legal Issues today, sir?
Good morning, Nate. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Okay, great. And good morning to your guest, the other attorney. Well, basically, what this can do for the Democrats is it gives the Democrats an opportunity to show the American people that the Republican Party is not fit to lead. And it's a golden opportunity for the Democrats. I would send every piece of level-headed legislation to the Republicans and let them shoot it down. And we'll just be setting ourselves up for 2024. But Nate, if I may, and I'm glad you got a law professor on, and I'm glad Ms. Banks is here this morning. Nate, I want to ask you or tell you that I will be opposing. We have a U.S. magistrate named Matthew P. Bookman from the southern part of Indiana who's going to replace Judge Young. His nomination, he's been nominated by President Biden. I'm going to be asking my senators, Young and Braun, and through you, to ask President to withdraw his nomination. And I'll tell you why. That magistrate handled a request from me, but he sent the response back in one of the most disrespectful ways I've ever seen a magistrate judge ever send back a ruling. and the ruling was sectioned in pieces of paper in 5 sections, and I had to essentially tape the ruling back together just to read it. And it was so shocking to me. And this is Matthew P. Brookman, and he's a magistrate, and I'm asking that the National Bar Association and local other Indianapolis Bar Association oppose his nomination. And I'll be sending a letter to my senators asking that his name be withdrawn for an appointment to the federal courts here in Indianapolis. And I just wanted to tell that to you, Nate, because I know you're a heavy hitter here in town. And I'm glad I got a law professor on, and Miss Banks, another attorney. Thank you for taking my call, Nate, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, to the caller, the way that this process worked, the retiring judge, Judge Young, he had worked out a deal because he has a lifetime appointment as a federal judge. And so Magistrate Brookman was his magistrate. And the significance of this is that Indiana Southern District is really a long district. It goes all the way down to the river. And so you have Evansville, New Albany, and places like that. And then also it goes to Terre Haute. So they wanted a judge that could cover the southern part of the state. If you were a judge out of Indianapolis, a federal judge, you would have to travel a long distance to have hearings. And so for convenience, they actually wanted somebody from the southern part of the state. And primarily, this judge may have some cases in Indianapolis, but his primary role would be Southern Indiana. And so the person that you would contact would probably be someone at the White House up here, because at this point, the senators has already given him what is called a blue slip. So he's been supported by the senators already, and they're not going to withdraw that. The only person that could withdraw the nomination of the federal judge at this point is from the White House.
Well, if the senators get some information or scratch their head about something, they can put a hold on that nomination. It's a long shot, but I think
actually it won't happen. Let me explain what has happened. Before the election, the U.S. Senate was divided equally, or 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats, and we have a tie vote. But what most people didn't realize, the deal that Schumer and McConnell made, is that all of the senators' committee were equally, like 10-10, like the judiciary was 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats. So in order for a candidate, this is very important, in order for a candidate to get through the process, you have to have at least one Republican support that candidate. So in the 7th Circuit, that would be Senator Young, because he was a lawyer and, he's a pretty level-headed guy. And so he supported the candidates in the 7th Circuit for district court or the 7th Circuit. So, he's been a moderate type Republican on judicial appointment, not Braun, but Young, right? So now when we had the election, we now have 51 senators. And so the committee composition will change on all the committees now. We will have the majority, like in the judiciary, it should be 11-9 now instead of 10-10. So in essence, going forward, if Christine Sinema stays a Democrat, and it seems like she is, then we will have the advantage in the committee process. So therefore, a candidate can now get through the process without the Republican support. So you have, because you have Democrat majority. And one of the things that most people realize, because we had a divided Senate, the vice president had to stay alert at all times the Senate was in session and they had to vote. So our vice president, Kamala Harris, had an ongoing process where she had to be involved in the Senate. So in any event,
Well,
what that means is the only way you could block his nomination, you have to deal directly with the White House, in other words.
Mr.
they'll get a letter.
Nathaniel Lee,
Yes.
if I could. I just wanted to, agree with what you said. And we have to trust that, and each, it's difficult for magistrates and judges to, every case is different. And I understand the concern about a particular issue. And those are the things that really need to be taken up very, very directly earlier. And I need to correct something that I said. We don't have time to go into it. I'll come back later and go into greater detail about the electoral college and its composition and the challenges to why it doesn't work as well, because it's one electoral vote for every state based on population. And I said I spoke too quickly about how it works, and I can talk about that some other time.
They have different numbers based on the population.
Right, exactly.
In general, it's a dated concept. The President Biden won the popular vote by 7.1 million votes, and he could have lost the election, but for 100,000 votes in several key states such as Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada and Arizona. So
right.
If you take those 5 states, I don't remember what the total was in Georgia. Was it 21,000 votes?
I don't recall.
But it wasn't a lot of votes in any of those states.
Vanita did.
And so he could have won the popular vote by 7.1 million or 6.9 million and then still lost. And so I think that's dated. But the problem that we had, so our listeners can know, what was the problem we had? Even though we had what seemed to be the majority in Article 1 of the Constitution, the Congress, which is the House and the Senate, we had 2 senators in the Democratic Party who did not, when our professor talked about the John Lewis legislation, we had to have those 2 Democrats break ranks away from the Republican to get that legislation passed by majority vote. They did not. They wanted to do the so-called that super majority. We have at least 60 senators, which we're never going to get. And so that kind of personally angered me in the sense that we could have had some important legislation passed that protected the rights of minority, particularly African Americans, but we couldn't get the 2 Democratic senators on board to pass that important legislation. And that's where we're at now. But
Therefore,
yes, sir.
I think
I'm going to Attorney Banks. Hey, Ms. Pullum, I'm going to Attorney Banks. Attorney Banks, go ahead.
Well, I was going to just build on your point about the George Floyd Policing Act and move to a discussion regarding Illinois. And one of the efforts, a sweeping effort taken by the Illinois legislature in the aftermath of George Floyd's death and led by the Illinois Black Caucus, the Illinois Safety Act was passed last year and became effective on January 1st of this year. And it's sweeping criminal justice legislation, including significant police reform measures, including what's been proposed in the national law, which is the elimination of chokeholds, as well as a requirement of police body cameras by the year 2025. It also bans police departments from purchasing military equipment and weapons of war to police our communities. And so the states are moving forward, and I submit that Illinois is a model for state legislation addressing our criminal justice system. It also requires a significant and overhaul and reforms in training, in crisis management, and also de-escalating situations. A very controversial provision of the law, however, the elimination of cash bonds, which Illinois would be the first state to enact such a provision, was stayed by the Illinois Supreme Court last week, as the issue of the constitutionality of a cashless bond law is being appealed to the Illinois court. There's an argument, and it was made by 60 state attorneys across 60 counties here in Illinois, and there are a total of 102 counties, but 60 state attorneys filed an action in an Illinois county court, arguing that the elimination of cash bond is unconstitutional because it takes away the authority of the judicial branch. And when we talk about the three branches of government, the judicial branch in making discretionary decisions regarding cash bond, and that the legislature does not have the authority to interfere in that judicial decision-making process. So I'll stop there.
Well, I thought that's some important legislation. I know the people that are against the legislation were saying that by eliminate the cash bail system, that you have recidivism should increase. So it'd be interesting to see whether or not that's accurate or inaccurate. I know that the typical person would have a loved one incarcerated. It's a terrible financial blow to them to get that person released from jail. And the whole purpose of bail is to ensure the person would appear in court. So when you sign a bail bond, even for example, you sign security interest in your house, whatever your assets are. And so that didn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's the system we use in the cash bail system. And so hopefully this system works and they can have this become a model for the country.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm still here. Nate, I'm still here.
Yes, what was your question, sir?
No, thank you for taking my call. And I just want to say that we can do a lot better than Matthew P. Brookman. And there's a whole lot of good lawyers and judges down there in Southern Indiana that should have gotten nominated. And I want to thank you for taking my call. And my senator is going to get a letter anyway, because he does not need to be on the U.S. District Court. Thank you for taking my call, Nate.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, Imhotep, you have a question or comment for us today?
How you doing, Brother Nate?
I'm doing great.
All right, good. And hello, Happy New Year to your guests. Just want to throw something out there real quick. There's two cases in Texas that deal with the First Amendment I read yesterday. One is Villarreal versus Laredo. It's in the Fifth Circuit Federal Court, and the other one is Pulliam versus Fort Bend, and it deals with journalists and the right to record police in public or to publish information gathered from the police without prior permission. And Judge Hull, at first, Villarreal she was arrested for filming the police in Texas. Then the case was thrown out. So then she sued the Laredo the police department. Then the district court threw it out, where she appealed to the Fifth Circuit, and Judge Hull and the three-judge panel upheld her appeal. And Judge Hull wrote that qualified immunity does not exempt public officials from doing wrong when it's contrary to breaking the Constitution. So they're going to have an en banc review of this. All 16 members of the court are going to review this. This is a critical case because we have to have accomplish is journalism. We have to have journalists to uncover the darkness that goes on out here. And they're very disturbed, especially Pulliam. He was a conservative member in college. And when he started doing journalist work, his worldview changed. So last year, we had a journalist arrested in front of Chase Wall Street Journal journalist brother. I think it was in November, but the video just come out. So there's been a definitely attack on journalism here. And according to CNN, 230 journalists were arrested last year in the United States. I keep wanting to talk about other countries, but it seems to be an attack on journalism here, which I think was fueled by Trump. So I just wanted to throw you guys out there and see that they always talk about the Second Amendment, but people understand the First Amendment is the bedrock to keeping democracy safe. And thanks for taking my call.
Well, that was an interesting concept he raised. And I'm not sure of what the law is in all 50 states, but in general, you are allowed to film things that are in public space. I agree with the assessment that if you're interfering with a lawful police activity by being too close or within a zone of safety, that's one issue, but just to simply film a police officer, I think is a good citizen right to do. And, so hopefully that's become the norm, because I think that is what been the biggest changes in our society. I know Milton Grimes, Attorney Grimes, that the seminal case on this was the Rodney King case, where a bystander filmed Rodney King getting beaten up by police officers, and it later became a national type issue. And then from that point on, it seemed like everybody did videotaping. The George Floyd case was probably the most instructional case I'd ever seen on videotaping. It appears in the George Floyd case, everyone had a video camera, and recorded it. It was just the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. All the citizens there taped this, and that evidence was important to show what was criminality. So we like to thank those folks for being a responsible citizen. And I encourage everyone else, if you see something, instead of saying something, record it. Right? So I applaud those efforts. What do you think, counselors?
Well, I think that certainly, it's so one of the things that's wonderful. We can go back and look at the precedent, the Rodney King, which was the first time Americans saw the horror of the unprovoked, continued beating of an African-American male. We had not seen that. We had a notion that there was someone just got hit on the head and that was it. And then we got to the George Floyd, which was, looking at the slaughter of a human being. And, so I'm all for having as much freedom of the press, of people it goes on YouTube anyway. And so it's critical now. We have our cameras, we have our all kinds of devices to record sound as well. And I hope that all of it is expanded even the more. We certainly applaud even the insurrectionists who recorded themselves. And many of them now are sitting in jail or have been prosecuted or pled guilty because they recorded themselves engaged in lawlessness. But I'm all for really eliminating all of these privileges that go back to a time when actually all Americans, African Americans, obviously, could not vote on these matters.
Attorney Banks?
My view is that, of course, the First Amendment is a fundamental right. And I'm interested in reviewing those cases that the caller pointed out to unpack what, the facts and the holding and the rationale is in those cases as we compare them to the discussion that we're having, again, going back to the Rodney King case, and most recently, the murder of George Floyd that we all witnessed worldwide. I'm very interested in these two Texas cases and will be reviewing those and potentially coming back and having a further discussion regarding those court opinions.
One of the things that we've seen in terms of recording police activities, want to make something real clear. When you're faced with a situation where you feel a need to record police officers, there's certain steps that I think you should be aware of. First, in general, you have a right to record police officers in public spaces. But secondly, if you're on private property, the property owner may set rules about the taking of photographs, things like that, because on private property, a person could ask you to leave. If you don't leave, you become a trespasser. The third rule, though, is that police officers may not generally confiscate or demand to view your photograph or video without a warrant. A lot of people don't realize that. Even if you're arrested, the police may not search the digital contents of your cell phone without a warrant. And so a lot of people, it gives you some leverage that if you have a cell phone, you should always have a lock on it so that you have to have a passcode to access your phone. And but the police officer are not allowed to delete your evidence from your cell phone under any circumstances. And now, if you're interfering with the police officer doing arrest or investigation, that's not allowed. So, like, for example, a police interaction with citizens sometimes could lead to fatalities. So the police officer got to have a zone of safety to make sure that he's safe and the surrounding them safe in order to conduct an investigation. So, but you have a right from a distance, of course, to record it. And so you don't have to have the police consent or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. But you're not allowed to break laws when you're doing it. So trespassing, for example, interference with an officer or committing a secondary crime is not permitted, common sense. And so what should you do if you think that you're witnessing police brutality? Well, one, stand a safe distance, and if possible, use your cell phone to record and video what's happening. As long as you do not interfere with what the officers are doing and do not stand close enough to obstruct their movement, you have the right to observe and record the events that are plainly visible in public spaces. And you don't have to hide the fact that you're recording the video of it. And if you have the ability to upload it to the cloud, do so right away. If the police officer themselves break the law, confiscate your phone to try to delete the recording. So just keep that in mind.
Attorney Lee, can someone refuse to hand over their cell phone or other recording device to the police?
Well, there's a simple rule on that. A police officer cannot confiscate personal property of yours, A, without a warrant, or B, the only time in which, if you're committing a crime, the police officer can arrest you and they can take possession of property, but they're not permitted to delete the contents from your evidence. So as a practical matter, in general, no. But what the police officer, bad policing, police that engage in misconduct, in order to hide the misconduct, they may themselves commit a secondary offense by confiscating the evidence and trying to delete it, which is not permitted. And that's why I'll urge people to quickly upload it to the cloud. So if they try to delete it, then they themselves commit a crime, then you have some evidence. Now, the one thing that we've been pushing locally and nationally is, of course, body cameras. And so that's for another day, but body cameras is a good investigatory tool that protects police officers and citizens, because we're seeing some important things on the body camera. Also, I need to tell everybody, everywhere we go now, there's cameras on stores, restaurant, every department store has it. So if you're involved in a situation, don't forget, you have the right to ask the owner of the facility to give you a copy of the videotaping of it. And in my practice, I've been able to get voluntary surrender of this evidence all the time. You know, I had people shot, I had people run over by cars, and I had a case here in Indy on East 38th Street where a person got run over by a car near CVS. They called me, I ran to the CVS, I took my thumb drive, and they downloaded the video to show what happened. And the video showed that the car was at fault, and the police determined that the pedestrian was at fault. And so that's why it was important to know where the evidence is and things like that. But in any event, I'd like to thank our special guest today for tuning in. Any closing comment, Dean Robinson and Attorney Banks?
I yield to my senior, Vanita Banks.
Well, the closing comments are that this week is going to be very interesting to watch as the newly constituted U.S. Congress for the 118th session of Congress gets underway with the introduction of this rule package. Be interesting to see how that piece moves forward.
One word, chaos.
But it allows us to stand strong, to be vigilant, to always, and I thank you so much, Attorney Lee, my dear friend, for bringing these issues to your viewers so that they can know what's going on in Washington, no matter where they may be seated. Thank you so much.
And I'd like to thank each and every one of you, our audience. We'll be on next week, and we're generally not broadcasting during the holidays, but we'll be back next week to cover important legal issues of the day. And don't forget, if you've not taken your booster shot for the COVID, make sure you do so, because the life you save may be your own. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and have a blessed day.
You too. Happy New Year again.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Attorney Lee.